The sun was setting over Pine Ridge, casting long shadows across the small town. Harold Harry Dawson, a 90-year-old Army veteran, stood outside his modest home. His garden, filled with roses and tomatoes, stretched out behind the house, a testament to years of careful tending. Harry had lived here for decades, ever since he returned from the war. It wasn't much, but it was his. Every evening, rain or shine, he would take out the trash himself. It was a habit he refused to give up, even though Linda Carter, his neighbor, often offered to help. Tonight, as Harry stepped onto the cracked pavement of his driveway, the air felt heavier than usual. The distant rumble of engines broke the calm. At first, it sounded like thunder rolling in from the west, but soon the noise grew louder, closer. Harry turned toward the road just as a group of bikers roared into view. Their motorcycles were loud, almost deafening, and they moved together like a pack of wolves hunting prey. Leather jackets, bandanas, and skull-adorned helmets made them look more like troublemakers than ordinary riders. Harry frowned slightly but didn't flinch. He'd seen worse things in his life, things that still haunted him in his dreams. But tonight all he wanted was to finish this simple chore and go back inside. He tightened his grip on the garbage bag and started walking toward the curb. "Hey, old man," one of the bikers shouted, revving his engine. "What are you doing out here? Shouldn't you be in bed by now?" Harry stopped mid-step. He glanced at the biker, a tall, muscular guy with tattoos covering his arms. The man sneered, showing teeth stained yellow from too many cigarettes. The rest of the gang slowed down, forming a loose circle around Harry. They laughed, their voices rough and mocking. "I'm taking out my trash," Harry replied calmly. His tone carried no fear, just a quiet dignity that seemed to irritate the bikers even more. "Oh, look at this," another biker chimed in. This one had stringy hair tied back in a ponytail and wore sunglasses despite the fading light. "The old geezer thinks he's tough." More laughter erupted from the group. One of them leaned forward on his bike, pointing a finger at Harry. "You think you're some kind of hero, huh? Like those stories about World War II vets saving the world?" Harry didn't respond. He knew better than to engage with people like these. Instead, he focused on placing the trash bag neatly by the curb. But the bikers weren't done. Another rider dismounted his motorcycle and approached Harry, his boots crunching against the gravel. He was shorter than the others, but radiated menace. "You don't talk much, do you?" the biker said, stopping just inches away. He smelled of alcohol and sweat. "Maybe we should teach you how to have a little fun." Before Harry could react, the biker shoved him hard in the chest. Harry stumbled backward, barely managing to stay upright. Pain shot through his body, but he gritted his teeth and straightened himself. These punks weren't going to break him. Not tonight, not ever. Linda Carter heard the commotion from her living room window. She had been watching TV when the sound of roaring engines caught her attention. Curious, she peeked outside and saw the bikers surrounding Harry. Her heart sank. Without hesitation, she grabbed her phone and dialed 911. Back on the street, the situation escalated quickly. Two more bikers got off their motorcycles and joined the first one. Together, they pushed Harry again, harder this time. He fell to the ground, landing awkwardly on his side. The impact knocked the wind out of him, but he forced himself to sit up. His pride wouldn't let him lie there like a helpless old man. "What's wrong, Grandpa?" one of the bikers taunted, kicking dirt in Harry's direction. "Can't handle a little roughhousing?" Harry clenched his fists. Despite his age, he still had fight left in him. With surprising speed, he swung his arm upward, catching the nearest biker in the shin. The man yelped in pain and staggered backward, giving Harry enough space to scramble to his feet. For a moment, the bikers looked stunned. No one expected an old man to put up any resistance. But then anger took over. One of them lunged at Harry, grabbing him by the collar. Another punched him in the stomach, doubling him over. The blows kept coming, relentless and brutal. Harry tried to defend himself, but there were too many of them. Eventually, he collapsed to the ground, battered and bleeding. From her window, Linda watched in horror as the bikers delivered their final kicks before mounting their bikes and speeding away. Tears streamed down her face as she gave the dispatcher the address. "Please hurry," she begged. "They're hurting him." Moments later, the flashing lights of a police car appeared at the end of the street. Officers rushed to Harry's side, calling for an ambulance. Linda ran out of her house, wrapping a blanket around the frail man as he lay motionless on the cold pavement. His eyes fluttered open briefly, meeting hers. "I'm okay," he whispered weakly, though his swollen face told a different story. Word of the attack spread quickly through Pine Ridge. By morning, everyone knew what had happened. The bikers belonged to a notorious gang called the Iron Talons, known for causing trouble wherever they went. Locals whispered about the gang's violent tendencies, but no one had dared to stand up to them, until now. Frank Miller, a journalist for the Pine Ridge Gazette, arrived at the scene early the next day. He snapped photos of the bloodstains on the driveway and interviewed neighbors who had witnessed parts of the incident. Everyone agreed on one thing. Harry Dawson might be old, but he had shown incredible courage facing down those thugs. As Frank spoke with Linda, she recounted the events of the previous night. "He didn't deserve that," she said, her voice trembling. "He's a good man, a hero, and they treated him like garbage." Frank nodded, jotting notes in his notebook. He planned to write a full article about the assault, hoping to bring attention to the growing problem of gang violence in the area. But deep down, he wondered if anything would really change. The Iron Talons were dangerous, and most people were too scared to speak out against them. Later that afternoon, Frank visited Harry in the hospital. The veteran was hooked up to machines, his face bruised and bandaged. Still, there was a spark in his eyes, a quiet defiance that refused to be extinguished. "Mr. Dawson," Frank began gently, "can you tell me what happened last night?" Harry hesitated, then nodded. In a raspy voice, he described the encounter with the bikers. He didn't embellish the story or try to make himself sound braver than he was. He simply told the truth, leaving Frank deeply moved. When the interview ended, Frank thanked Harry and promised to share his story with the world. As he left the hospital, he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was brewing in Pine Ridge. Something, or someone, was bound to step in and set things right. Little did he know, help was already on its way. Far away, a bus rumbled along a highway carrying a passenger who needed no introduction. Tall, strong, and silent, he stared out the window at the passing landscape. His cowboy hat rested low on his forehead, shielding his eyes from the glare of the setting sun. Chuck, Norris was coming to Pine Ridge. The next morning, Pine Ridge woke up to news that spread faster than wildfire. Everyone talked about what happened to Harry Dawson, the old veteran who had been beaten by the Iron Talons. People gathered in small groups outside shops, whispering about the attack. Some were angry, others were scared. No one could believe such a thing had happened in their quiet little town. At the local diner, Mary Johnson wiped down tables while keeping one ear on the conversations around her. She worked long hours serving coffee and pie to customers, many of whom came from nearby businesses. Over the years, she'd learned to listen carefully to what people said when they thought no one was paying attention. That morning, most of the talk centered on Harry and the bikers. "They shouldn't have messed with him," said Joe Parker, a mechanic sipping his third cup of coffee. "That man served our country. He deserves respect." Mary nodded silently, though her mind raced. With worry, she knew more than she let on. Just last week, 2 members of the Iron Talons had come into the diner, demanding free meals in exchange for protection. When she refused, they threatened to vandalize the place. Mary paid them off reluctantly, hoping it would be the end of it. Now, after hearing about Harry's assault, she feared worse was coming. Across town, Sheriff Alan Blake sat in his office, staring at the stack of papers on his desk. Reports of vandalism, theft, and intimidation had piled up over the past few months, all linked to the Iron Talons. But every time he tried to investigate, witnesses clammed up or evidence disappeared. It was frustrating, especially now when everyone expected him to do something about Harry's case. "We need to catch these guys," Deputy Lisa Carter said, standing beside him. Lisa was young and eager, with a strong sense of justice. "People are scared, Sheriff. If we don't act fast, things will get worse." "I know. Alan replied, rubbing his temples. But without solid proof, we can't hold them, and even if we arrest them, they'll probably walk free before sunrise. Lisa frowned but didn't argue. She knew he was right. Still, something had to change. The Iron Talons weren't just a nuisance anymore. They were a threat to the entire community. Meanwhile, Frank Miller typed furiously on his laptop at the Pine Ridge Gazette office. After visiting Harry in the hospital, he felt a deep responsibility to tell the veteran's story. He wanted to expose the Iron Talons for who they really were, bullies hiding behind motorcycles and leather jackets. But writing the article wasn't easy. Every source he contacted either hung up or refused to comment. Fear had gripped the town like a vice. Determined to find answers, Frank decided to visit the diner where Mary worked. He arrived during the lunch rush, slipping into a booth near the back. Mary spotted him immediately and approached with a pot of coffee. "You here to ask about the bikers?" she said quietly, pouring him a cup. Frank nodded. "If you're willing to talk." Mary glanced over her shoulder, making sure none of the staff was listening. Then she leaned closer, lowering her voice. "They've been shaking down businesses for months. They call it protection, but it's extortion. I gave them money last week because I didn't want trouble. But now," her voice trailed off as tears welled up in her eyes. "Now I'm not so sure." "Did they threaten you?" Frank asked gently. She hesitated, then nodded. "They said they'd smash my windows if I didn't pay up. What am I supposed to do, call the cops? Everyone knows they won't do anything." Frank scribbled notes in his notebook, feeling both anger and helplessness. Mary wasn't the only victim, just the bravest one willing to speak out. As he left the diner, he promised himself he'd include her story in the article, even if it meant changing her name to protect her identity. Back at the hospital, Harry's condition improved slowly. Though his body ached, his spirit remained unbroken. Visitors streamed in throughout the day, bringing flowers, cards, and words of encouragement. Among them was Linda Carter, who stopped by every evening after work. "You're a hero, Harry," she told him during one visit. "Standing up to those thugs like that, it takes guts." Harry chuckled weakly. "I didn't stand a chance against them, but I wasn't going to let them push me around either." Linda smiled sadly. "Still, you showed them you weren't afraid. That means something." As the days passed, tensions in Pine Ridge reached a boiling point. Protests erupted outside the sheriff's office, with residents holding signs that read, "Justice for Harry and stop the violence." Jake Malone, the leader of the Iron Talons, watched the chaos unfold from afar, smirking. To him, the protests were nothing more than entertainment, a sign that his gang held all the power. But not everyone shared his confidence. Several members of the Iron Talons began to feel uneasy. Rumors started circulating about a stranger seen lurking near the edge 536 DFB. 3 days after the attack on Harold Harry Dawson, Pine Ridge woke up to an unexpected visitor. At the crack of dawn, a bus pulled into the small terminal on the outskirts of town. The engine hissed as it came to a stop, and passengers began filing out, stretching their legs after the long ride. Among them was a man who stood out immediately, not because he shouted or drew attention to himself, but because of the quiet confidence he exuded. He wore a cowboy hat tilted low over his forehead, aviator sunglasses shielding his eyes, and a simple leather jacket over a plain t-shirt. His jeans were worn but clean, and his boots looked sturdy, like they'd seen many miles. He carried only a small duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Without saying a word, he stepped onto the pavement, glanced around briefly, and walked toward the exit. The ticket agent inside the station watched him leave, her curiosity piqued. "That guy's got a presence," she muttered to herself, shaking her head. But she quickly returned to her work, dismissing the thought. The man's first stop was Betty Lewis's motel, a modest establishment just a block away from the bus station. Betty, a kind-hearted widow in her 60s, greeted him warmly when he entered. She had been running the motel for years and prided herself on making guests feel at home. "Good morning," she said with a smile. "Just passing through?" Man nodded once, his expression unreadable behind the sunglasses. His voice was calm and steady when he spoke. I'll need a room for a couple of nights. Betty handed him a key without hesitation. Room 6 is ready. It's quiet and comfortable. Let me know if you need anything. Thank you, he replied simply before heading outside to unload his bag. As Betty watched him walk away, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something special about this guest. There was a stillness about him, a sense of purpose that made her wonder why he had come to Pine Ridge. But she didn't pry. Instead, she went back to organizing the front desk, humming softly to herself. Later that afternoon, the man ventured into town. He moved slowly, taking in everything around him, the rows of houses, the bustling main street, and the people going about their daily lives. He stopped by the hospital first, slipping quietly into Harry Dawson's room. The old veteran was asleep, his face pale but peaceful. The man stood by the bed for a moment, watching him breathe. Then, without a sound, he turned and left. Linda Carter happened to be walking down the hallway as he exited. She froze when she saw him, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Chuck Norris?" she whispered, almost to herself. He paused, tipping his hat slightly in acknowledgement before continuing on his way. Linda stared after him, her mind racing. Was it really him? What was he doing here? She wanted to follow, to ask questions, but something about his demeanor told her not to. So she stayed where she was, heart pounding with excitement. Word of Chuck Norris's arrival spread quickly. By evening, nearly everyone in Pine Ridge knew he was in town. People whispered about it in shops, at dinner tables, and on street corners. Some were skeptical, thinking it was just a rumor. Others believed it wholeheartedly, convinced that the legendary martial artist had come to set things right. Among those intrigued was Jake Malone, the leader of the Iron Talons. He sat in the gang's clubhouse, nursing a beer while his crew played cards nearby. When one of his men mentioned seeing Chuck walking through town earlier, Jake scoffed. "What's he gonna do?" Jake sneered, slamming his bottle on the table. "This ain't Hollywood. We run this place, not some washed-up actor." His words sounded confident, but deep down, Jake felt uneasy. He'd heard the stories about Chuck Norris, how he could take down entire armies single-handedly, how his roundhouse kicks could shatter concrete. Ridiculous tales, sure, but they stuck in Jake's mind nonetheless. And now, with Chuck in Pine Ridge, he couldn't shake the feeling that trouble was coming. That night, the Iron Talons gathered at their favorite bar, trying to act tough despite their growing anxiety. They laughed loudly, telling crude jokes, and drinking too much. But every time someone walked past the window, they tensed, wondering if it was him. Sure enough, just before midnight, they spotted Chuck standing across the street. He wasn't hiding or trying to blend in. He stood perfectly still, his arms crossed, watching them through the glass. For a moment, the entire bar fell silent. Even the jukebox seemed to pause. Then, slowly, conversations resumed, though quieter than before. No one dared go outside to confront him. Jake clenched his fists under the table, his jaw tight. "Who does he think he is?" he growled. "Just standing there like some damn statue." One of his buddies shrugged nervously. "Maybe we should lay low for a bit, until he leaves." "Are you kidding me?" Jake snapped. "We're the Iron Talons. We don't back down from anyone." But as the hours dragged on, even Jake began to doubt himself. Chuck didn't move. He didn't speak. He just waited, his presence looming larger than any threat they'd ever faced. Back at the motel, Betty noticed Chuck sitting alone on a bench outside his room. She brought him a cup of coffee, setting it down beside him. "Thought you might like this," she said gently. He looked up at her, removing his sunglasses for the first time. His eyes were sharp, piercing, yet strangely kind. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft but firm. Betty hesitated, wanting to ask why he'd come to Pine Ridge, but instead she smiled and nodded. "If you need anything, just let me know." Chuck gave her a slight nod in return, then turned his gaze back to the horizon. Betty walked away, feeling both comforted and unsettled. Whatever he was planning, she knew it would change the town. Forever. As the stars blinked overhead, Pine Ridge remained eerily quiet. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the whole town was holding its breath. Everyone wondered what would happen next. Would Chuck Norris stay silent, or would he step in to face the iron talons? Only time would tell. The night was quiet in Pine Ridge, too quiet. Most residents had gone to bed early, tired from the stress of recent events. But not everyone was asleep. At the Iron Talons clubhouse, the gang gathered for their usual late-night drinking session. Bottles clinked together as they toasted to their dominance over the town. Laughter echoed through the building, though it lacked its usual swagger. The presence of Chuck Norris weighed heavily on their minds. Jake Malone tried to shake off the unease. "Forget about him," he barked at his crew. "He's probably just passing through. What's he gonna do anyway? Kick our asses?" His words were meant to sound confident, but they rang hollow even to his own ears. Still, the others nodded along, desperate to believe him. They needed to feel like they were still in control. Outside, Chuck stood silently in the shadows, observing the clubhouse. He didn't rush. He didn't show anger or fear. He simply waited until the moment felt right. Then, without hesitation, he stepped forward and pushed open the heavy wooden door. The laughter inside died instantly. Every head turned toward the entrance where Chuck stood, framed by the dim light spilling in from outside. His cowboy hat rested low on his forehead, and his aviator sunglasses glinted faintly. For a long moment, no one moved. It was as if time itself had frozen. Finally, Jake broke the silence. "What the hell do you want?" he snarled, rising unsteadily to his feet. His voice wavered despite his attempt to sound tough. Chuck didn't answer. Instead, he took another step into the room, letting the door swing shut behind him. The sound of it closing echoed like a gunshot, snapping the bikers out of their stunned stupor. One of them, a wiry guy named Pete, lunged forward, swinging a bottle at Chuck's head. Without flinching, Chuck caught the bottle mid-air, twisted it out of Pete's grip, and smashed it against the nearest wall. Before Pete could react, Chuck delivered a swift punch to his stomach, sending him crumpling to the ground. The rest of the gang sprang into action, charging at Chuck all at once. But Chuck moved like water, fluid and unstoppable. A roundhouse kick sent two men flying backward into a table, splintering it under their weight. Another biker swung a chair at him, but Chuck grabbed it effortlessly, yanked it away, and used it to knock three more attackers off their feet. Jake watched in horror as his crew fell one by one. Panic surged through him, but he forced himself to stay put. Grabbing a pool cue from the corner, he shouted, "Get him!" Chuck ducked under the first swing of the pool cue, then spun around and disarmed Jake with a single, precise motion. The weapon clattered to the floor as Chuck grabbed Jake by the collar and lifted him off the ground. Their eyes met, Jake's wide with terror, Chuck's cold and unwavering. "You messed with the wrong man," Chuck said quietly, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Then, with a sharp shove, he threw Jake across the room. The gang leader crashed into the bar counter, knocking bottles and glasses to the floor. By now, the clubhouse was in shambles. Broken furniture littered the space, and the remaining bikers lay groaning or unconscious. Chuck surveyed the destruction calmly, brushing dust off his hands. Not a single scratch marred his appearance. He adjusted his hat, turned, and walked out the same way he came in. Minutes later, Sheriff Alan Blake arrived, alerted by frantic calls from neighbors who had heard the commotion. Flashlights illuminated the scene as deputies rushed into the clubhouse. Inside, they found the Iron Talons in complete disarray. Some bikers were barely conscious, while others cowered in corners, too frightened to speak. "What happened here?" Alan demanded, staring at the carnage. No one answered. The few who could talk avoided his gaze, muttering vague excuses about a fight breaking out. But deep down, they all knew the truth. Chuck Norris had taken them down single-handedly. Outside, Chuck stood unnoticed in the darkness, watching as police cars surrounded the clubhouse. Satisfied that justice had been served, he slipped away into the night, disappearing as quietly as he had arrived. News of the showdown spread quickly throughout Pine Ridge. By morning, everyone knew what had happened. Frank Miller, the journalist, wasted no time writing an article detailing the event. Chuck Norris cleans house, biker gang defeated in one night, read the headline. The story made national headlines, sparking debates about heroism and vigilante justice. In the hospital, Harry Dawson learned about Chuck's actions from Linda, who visited him bright and early. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she recounted the tale. "It's true, Harry. Chuck Norris came to town and wiped the floor with those thugs. Just like in the movies." Harry chuckled weakly, shaking his head in disbelief. "I always knew. He was real," he joked, though there was a hint of awe in his voice. At Betty's motel, guests buzzed with excitement over the news. Many claimed to have seen Chuck during his brief stay, though none dared disturb him. When Betty knocked on his door later that day, she found the room empty. His key rested neatly on the bedside table, along with a folded note addressed to her. She opened it carefully, reading the short message inside. "Thank you for your kindness. Pine Ridge is safe now." Betty smiled, clutching the note to her chest. Wordlessly, she tucked it into her apron pocket, knowing she'd treasure it forever. As the day wore on, life in Pine Ridge began to return to normal, or as close to normal as possible after such a dramatic turn of events. Business owners breathed easier, relieved that the Iron Talon's reign of terror had ended. Residents gathered in small groups, sharing stories and marveling at Chuck's mysterious intervention. Mary Johnson, the diner waitress, felt safer than she had in months. She stopped paying protection money to the gang, confident that they wouldn't dare return. Even Joe Parker, the mechanic, admitted he felt inspired by the whole ordeal. "I never thought I'd say this," he told Frank during an interview, "but maybe sometimes we need someone like Chuck Norris to remind us what real strength looks like." Frank nodded, jotting notes in his notebook. He planned to include these reflections in his follow-up article, which would focus on how the town was healing after the incident. But not everyone celebrated Chuck's arrival. Jake Malone, battered and humiliated, swore revenge. From his hospital bed, he vowed to rebuild the Iron Talons and take back what he believed was theirs. Yet even as he raged, a part of him couldn't deny the truth. Chuck Norris wasn't someone you crossed twice. For most of Pine Ridge, however, hope replaced fear. People talked about starting neighborhood watch programs and organizing community events to strengthen bonds between neighbors. Linda Carter became especially active, volunteering at the local community center and encouraging others to get involved. Though Chuck Norris may never return to Pine Ridge, his impact lingered. The town emerged stronger, united by the knowledge that even in their darkest hour, a true hero could appear when least expected. And sometimes, words weren't needed to change the world. The legend of Chuck Norris lived on, whispered in conversations, and shared among friends. And though he left without fanfare, his actions reminded everyone that courage and justice could come in unexpected forms, even in the shape of a quiet stranger wearing a cowboy hat. In the weeks following the showdown at the Iron Talons clubhouse, life in Pine Ridge began to heal. The streets felt safer, and businesses reopened with renewed energy. People no longer flinched at the sound of motorcycles roaring through town because the gang had vanished completely. Some members fled Pine Ridge altogether, while others were too scared to regroup after what happened. Jake Malone, still nursing his wounds, both physical and emotional, kept a low profile, though rumors circulated that he was planning revenge. For now, however, the town basked in its newfound peace. One of the first signs of change came when a local artist named Billy Harper decided to create something special for the community. Inspired by the events of the past few weeks, Billy proposed painting a mural on the side of Mary Johnson's diner, a tribute to Harold Harry Dawson and the mysterious hero who saved the town. Everyone loved the idea, and soon volunteers gathered to help prepare the space. The mural took shape over several days, becoming a colorful celebration of courage and unity. At the center stood Chuck Norris, larger than life, looking as calm and commanding as ever. His cowboy hat cast a shadow over his face, but his stance radiated strength and purpose. Behind him stretched an idealized version of Pine Ridge, tidy houses, bustling shops, and smiling residents going about their daily routines. In the foreground, Harry Dawson appeared, saluting Chuck with pride. Even Linda Carter made it into the painting, depicted handing coffee to a grateful stranger. When the mural was finally unveiled, the entire town turned out for the occasion. Children pointed excitedly at the towering figure of Chuck Norris, while adults nodded approvingly. Frank Miller wrote an article about the event, calling the mural a symbol of hope and resilience. He interviewed Billy Harper, who explained his vision behind the artwork. "I wanted to remind everyone that even in tough times, heroes can appear when we least expect them," Billy said, gesturing toward the mural. "And not all heroes wear capes, or say much." Harry attended the unveiling in a wheelchair, pushed by Linda. Though his body was still recovering, his spirit remained unbreakable. As he gazed up at the mural, tears welled in his eyes. It wasn't just the painting itself that moved him. It was the way the town had come together to honor what had happened. Later that evening, Harry sat alone in his hospital room, reflecting on everything. The attack, the fear, the arrival of Chuck Norris. It all felt surreal, like something out of a movie. Yet here he was, surrounded by proof that real-life heroes existed. He thought about the stranger who had visited him briefly during his recovery. Chuck hadn't said a word, but his presence spoke volumes. Harry felt grateful, not just for being alive, but for living in a town that refused to give up. Meanwhile, Betty Lewis became a minor celebrity thanks to her brief encounter with Chuck. Reporters from nearby cities called her for interviews, asking what it was like hosting such a legendary guest. Betty stayed humble, recounting how polite and quiet Chuck had been during his stay. She treasured the note he left her, keeping it tucked safely in her Bible. To her, it wasn't just a memento. It was a reminder that kindness mattered, even in the smallest gestures. At the diner, Mary Johnson noticed a difference in her customers. Strangers stopped by more often, curious to see the mural and hear the story behind it. Sales increased, and Mary found herself smiling more than she had in years. One afternoon, a young traveler walked in, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He introduced himself as Billy Ray and ordered a cup of coffee. "Is it true?" he asked Mary after paying. "Did Chuck Norris really come here?" Mary laughed softly, nodding. "As true as anything I've ever seen." Billy Ray glanced at the mural, his expression thoughtful. "That's incredible. Sometimes you need someone to remind you what's possible." His words stuck with Mary long after he left. She realized how much the town had changed, not just because of Chuck Norris, but because of the way people responded to his actions. Fear had given way to courage, and division had transformed into unity. Frank Miller continued writing follow-up articles about Pine Ridge's recovery. He focused on the positive changes happening around town: new community programs, stronger neighborly bonds, and a renewed sense of pride. In one piece, he highlighted Linda Carter's efforts to bring people together. Since the attack on Harry, Linda had thrown herself into volunteer work, organizing events at the community center and encouraging others to get involved. "It's amazing what can happen when people decide to stand up for each other," Linda told Frank during an interview. "Chuck showed us that sometimes one person can make all the difference." Her words resonated with readers far beyond Pine Ridge. Letters poured in from across the country, praising the town for its resilience and thanking Chuck Norris for inspiring so many. Some even sent donations to support local initiatives aimed at preventing gang violence. Despite the progress, not everyone shared the optimism. Jake Malone, still bitter and angry, plotted his next move. From his hideout, a rundown trailer on the outskirts of town, he vowed to reclaim his power. But every time he tried to rally his remaining followers, doubts crept in. Images of Chuck Norris haunted him, making sleep impossible. Deep down, Jake knew he'd never be able to face someone like that again. Back in Pine Ridge, life moved forward. The mural became a beloved landmark, drawing visitors from neighboring towns. School children learned about the events surrounding it, inspired by Harry's bravery and Chuck's quiet heroism. Every day, someone would stop by to take a photo or simply admire the artwork. Harry eventually returned home, greeted by cheers from neighbors lining the street. They decorated his yard with balloons and banners, welcoming him back with open arms. Linda helped him settle in, ensuring he had everything he needed. Despite his injuries, Harry insisted on tending to his garden, determined to keep living life on his terms. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Harry wheeled himself outside to watch the sunset. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers. He closed his eyes, letting the warmth of the fading light wash over him. For the first time in weeks, he felt truly at peace. In the distance, a lone figure appeared on the edge of town. Tall and silent, he tipped his cowboy hat before disappearing into the twilight. Harry opened his eyes just in time to catch a glimpse of him. Smiling softly, he raised a hand in salute. Though Chuck Norris may never return to Pine Ridge, his legacy endured. The town stood stronger than ever, united by the knowledge that even in their darkest hour, a true hero could appear without warning. And sometimes, words weren't needed to change the world. The mural remained a testament to that truth, a beacon of hope for generations to come. And as long as it stood, the story of Chuck Norris and Harold Harry Dawson would live on, reminding everyone that courage, kindness, and justice could overcome even the greatest odds. Months passed and life in Pine Ridge settled into a rhythm of normalcy, but it was a different kind of normal than before. The fear that once gripped the town had faded, replaced by a quiet confidence. People went about their days with lighter hearts, knowing they no longer had to look over their shoulders or worry about gangs causing trouble. The Iron Talons were gone, their clubhouse abandoned and forgotten. Even Jake Malone seemed to vanish entirely, leaving behind only whispers of his threats that never materialized. The mural on the side of Mary Johnson's diner became a cherished symbol of the town's resilience. Tourists began visiting Pine Ridge just to see it, snapping photos and sharing stories of how the painting inspired them. Children played beneath it, pretending to be heroes like Chuck Norris, while adults stood nearby, reminiscing about the events that led to its creation. It wasn't just art, it was a reminder of what the town had overcome together. Frank Miller wrote one final article about the mural, calling it a legacy carved in paint. He interviewed several residents, including Harry Dawson, who spoke fondly of the stranger who changed everything. He didn't have to come here, Harry said, his voice steady despite his age. But he did, and because of that we're stronger now. Linda Carter continued her work at the community center, organizing events that brought people closer together. She started a storytelling night where locals could share personal experiences, from tales of bravery to lessons learned during tough times. Each session ended with applause and laughter, strengthening the bonds between neighbors. Linda often credited Chuck Norris for sparking the spirit of unity, though she knew the real change came from within the town itself. At Betty Lewis's motel, business picked up as travelers stopped to visit the mural or simply enjoy the charm of Pine Ridge. Betty kept the note Chuck left her framed on the front desk, showing it proudly to anyone curious enough to ask. "It's not every day you meet someone like him," she'd say with a smile. Her guests loved hearing her story, and many left feeling inspired to make a difference in their own communities. Mary Johnson noticed a shift in her customers too. Strangers arrived daily, eager to hear first-hand accounts of Chuck Norris's arrival. She told the story countless times, always ending with the same message. Sometimes all it takes is one person to remind us what's possible. Her diner buzzed with energy, the clinking of forks and cheerful chatter filling the air. For Harold Harry Dawson, life returned to its simple pleasures. He spent hours tending to his garden, nurturing plants that thrived under his care. Neighbors often joined him, helping with tasks he found difficult after his injuries. Together they laughed and shared stories, creating memories that felt richer than ever before. Though he still walked with a cane, Harry carried himself with pride, refusing to let the attack define him. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Harry wheeled himself outside to watch the sunset. The air smelled of blooming flowers and freshly cut grass, soothing and familiar. He closed his eyes, listening to the gentle rustle of leaves and distant chirping of crickets. For a moment, he thought about Chuck Norris, the silent guardian who had stepped in when no one else could, and wondered if he'd ever know why the man chose Pine Ridge. As if answering his unspoken question, a figure appeared on the edge of town. Tall and imposing, he wore a cowboy hat tilted low over his forehead and aviator sunglasses that caught the fading light. His presence was unmistakable, even from afar. Harry opened his eyes and squinted, recognizing the silhouette instantly. Chuck Norris stood motionless for a moment, gazing toward the town he had saved. Then, slowly, he tipped his hat, a subtle gesture of farewell, and turned to walk away. Harry raised a hand in salute, his heart swelling with gratitude. Though Chuck said nothing, his actions spoke louder than words ever could. When Harry recounted the sighting to Linda the next morning, she smiled knowingly. "Maybe he'll come back someday," she said softly. "Or maybe he's exactly where he needs to be right now." The thought lingered in Harry's mind as he went about his day. He realized that Chuck Norris wasn't just a man. He was a symbol of hope, courage, and justice. His brief appearance in Pine Ridge reminded everyone that even in the darkest moments, help could arrive unexpectedly. Sometimes it came in the form of a quiet stranger with unwavering determination. As weeks turned into months, the legend of Chuck Norris grew beyond Pine Ridge. News outlets across the country featured stories about the town's miraculous turnaround, crediting both Harry's bravery and Chuck's intervention. Letters poured in from people inspired by their tale, thanking them for restoring faith in humanity. Some even visited Pine Ridge to pay their respects, leaving flowers beneath the mural or shaking hands with Harry. Jake Malone remained absent, his name fading into obscurity. Rumors suggested he had moved far away, unable to face the humiliation of defeat. Without their leader, the remnants of the Iron Talons disbanded, scattering like leaves in the wind. The town breathed easier, free from the shadow of fear that once loomed over it. In the years that followed, Pine Ridge flourished. New businesses opened, families moved in, and the community center became a hub of activity. Linda's storytelling nights evolved into annual festivals celebrating courage and kindness. People traveled from miles around to attend, eager to hear the tale of how one man and one town proved that strength wasn't measured by size or noise but by action and heart. Harry lived long enough to see the mural become a national landmark, drawing visitors from all corners of the country. On sunny afternoons, he would sit in his garden, watching children play and couples stroll hand in hand. Occasionally, someone would stop to thank him, calling him a hero. Harry would chuckle and shake his head. "I'm just an old man," he'd say. The real hero wore a cowboy hat. Though Chuck Norris never returned to Pine Ridge, his impact endured. His silent yet powerful presence reminded everyone that true heroes don't seek recognition. They act because it's the right thing to do, and sometimes those actions ripple outward, changing lives in ways no one could predict. On the anniversary of the attack, the town gathered beneath the mural for a ceremony honoring Harry and Chuck. Frank Miller gave a speech, recounting the events that brought them together. "This isn't just a story about one man saving another," he said, his voice echoing through the crowd. "It's a story about a town coming together, about finding strength in each other and standing up for what's right." As the ceremony ended, Harry gazed up at the mural, his eyes misty with emotion. Beside him, Linda squeezed his hand, smiling warmly. In that moment, he felt deeply connected to everyone around him, to the past, present, and future of Pine Ridge. They weren't just survivors. They were thrivers, united by hope and resilience. That night, as stars twinkled above the quiet streets, a lone figure stood on the outskirts of town. Beneath the glow of the moon, he adjusted his cowboy hat and tipped it slightly toward Pine Ridge. Then, without a sound, he disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind only footprints in the dust. Though Chuck Norris may never return, his legacy remains etched in the hearts of those who remember him. In Pine Ridge, his actions serve as a timeless reminder that courage, kindness, and justice can overcome even the greatest odds. And sometimes, words aren't needed to change the world.